So let's talk about, we're kind of switching gears a little bit today. We're actually not going to do any coding today, at least I don't think so. But we're going to talk about something that I have found for most students in this course actually is the more difficult aspect of the project, which is managing how to plan the work that you're going to do. Most of you are quite good at coding because you've already done it in a bunch of classes. But as it turns out, organizing the work of a project, especially with a team and with a real customer, if you haven't done this before in industry, it's actually not it's not that it's difficult to do, it's just not obvious. So we're going to start by talking about behavior-driven design, or BDD, and user stories. And if you have taken 160 or a similar user interface or user experience course, you may have heard this term. So back when we started talking about Agile, we said one of the things that makes it work well is when the customer or the other stakeholders are people who care about the app for whatever reason, are involved during the development. They're giving you constant feedback. And that could include managers. It could include people who represent your customer. And one of the ways that they do that is every iteration you're deploying incremental new functionality, and you're giving the customer the opportunity to interact with it and give you feedback before things go wrong. In real life, in industry, typically 1-week iterations are common. We do 2-week iterations for a variety of reasons. Just your schedule is so crowded that it's harder to get stuff done in a week. And instead of the waterfall, where there's sort of these 5 major phases, and once you're done with a phase, you never visit it again, you're actually doing many times through this shorter cycle, and you're visiting each phase. So you're always sort of in contact with your stakeholder, and you're validating that the thing that you're building is actually the thing they want. So the question is, how do you arrive at agreement on what that thing is? And one of the contributions that sort of came out of the Agile movement is the idea of behavior-driven design, where you're basically asking questions about the behavior of the app, which is what the customer sees, before and during development to reduce the chance that you have a misunderstanding with a customer about what is to actually be built. And early on, we talked about the difference between validation, which is did you build the right thing, versus verification, which is did you build the thing right. The main idea about BDD that I want you to keep in mind for today is BDD says nothing about implementation. It is purely focused on the customer's experience when they use the software. So one way that we do this is we try to capture what the customer thinks they want in the form of user stories, which are sort of lightweight descriptions of how the app is going to be used. Some people call these use cases, but from the point of view of a web app, you can think of it as when I sit down at the browser to exercise some feature of the app, here's kind of the sequence of events that I do, and here's what I would expect to happen, what I would expect to see as a result after each one of those steps. So it's about the behavior of the app, because the customer generally doesn't know anything about how that behavior is being implemented, and for the most part, they should not care. In a separate unit, after we finish talking about behavior-driven design, we'll talk about test-driven development, or TDD, which is about the implementation. And sort of bridging those two is what the next couple of weeks' worth of the course material is all about. So again, hearkening back to the very first week of class or so, we had this picture about the phases of the life cycle, where you start each iteration by talking to your customer, which you'll have hopefully by next week. And we're going to talk about doing mock-ups, user stories, and scenarios. So the yellow is kind of what we're going to start talking about. I'm going to put up this slide 2 or 3 times in the next couple of lectures to sort of keep track of where we are in how you're going to do your team's work during each one of these iterations. Okay, so we're going to start with the talking to the customer part. User stories are really simple. You get a 3x5 index card, and working with the customer, you write down a thing that the app is supposed to do. That's basically the high-level description. Now, there's been a number of proposed sort of schemas, formulas for how you would write this down. We are a fan of what is called the Connextra format, after a now-defunct company that pioneered it. And the Connextra format basically has 3 chunks. There's the name of the feature, and I'm going to use as an example our simple movie reviewing app, Rotten Potatoes, adding a movie. How would a user add a new movie into the database? So besides the feature name, the 3 pieces are the kind of stakeholder, so who is it that wants this feature? So that, why do they want this feature? What is the business value? What is the goal they want to achieve, and why is that an important goal given the way that they want to use the app? And finally, what is the specific task they want to do? So in this case, we have, as a movie fan, so that I can share movies with other fans, I want to add a movie to Rotten Potatoes. Simple enough. It doesn't necessarily matter which order the phrases go in, but for reasons we'll see, it's actually very useful to make sure you have all three pieces. Who is the stakeholder? What's the purpose? And what's the goal? Right? And sometimes it reads more naturally if you maybe put them in a different order. The really neat idea, which we'll see on Thursday, probably not today, is you can essentially expand on this in a little bit of detail into the sequence of steps that the user would take to actually make this happen. If that functionality existed, what would it be like to use it? What are the forms that would appear? What would they fill out? What would they see in each case? If they entered something that was erroneous or illegal, what kind of error messages might they expect to see? All of that can be spelled out in more detail, and the cool thing is we can turn that level of detail into a runnable test. So in some sense, you're going to get a test that does double duty. On the one hand, it is a way to capture what the customer and you agreed on that they want. And on the other hand, because the test really does exercise the code, it is a test that checks for correctness, right? So it is checking both the behavior from the user's point of view and also the implementation of your code. So that'll be cool stuff. OK, so that's that. Since one of the things that I kind of promised all of you is that everything we present in this course is something that is widely practiced in industry and that we, the teaching staff, actually practice ourselves. This is a recent whiteboard photo. If you've worked at a software company, you've probably seen some version of this. This is basically a whiteboard and Post-it notes version of what we're going to do with a tool called Pivotal Tracker. But using user stories as sort of the unit of describing work to be done on an application and measuring our progress on that work is kind of what this is all about. So if I zoom in on a couple of these, you can see that there's a story about business integration that says, as a product manager, I receive an accurate bill for information services each month in order to pay for what I owe. So there's the three pieces, right? Who am I? I'm a project manager. What's the thing that I'm doing? I want to receive an accurate bill for information services each month. And why? Because I want to be able to pay what I owe. Now, it doesn't say on the card, or the Post-it in this case, why that's a story that has business value, but we'll give you a sort of heuristic so that when you're talking about stories with a customer, you can get to the bottom of what's the real motivation behind the story. Like, what if they didn't pay what they owe every month, right? Something bad would happen to their business, presumably. So that's where we're going. Where did this come from? It comes from the HCI community. And as I said, if you've taken an HCI course, you may have seen something like this before. But the reason that they settled on the sort of paper and pencil technology is it's non-threatening. So it's not technological. No stakeholder is going to feel like they don't know how to operate an index card and a pencil or a pen. So it's a kind of brainstorming that doesn't sort of inadvertently shut out people who think, oh, you're using some brainstorming tool, like you're using Google Docs. I don't know how to use that. Everybody understands how to use index cards. It's easy to rearrange them. You saw the Post-its so that you can sort of move things up or down depending on their priority. And again, that's a process where the team and a customer representative can sort of participate in that. In our case, we're going to use a tool for this so that once you've collected the sort of paper and pencil version, your team will be able to do prioritization a little more nicely. The stories are short. It's got to fit on an index card. And the tool that we're going to use preserves that. The actual text of the story is just like a couple of lines. So the idea is that they're easy to change during development. If you got a story wrong, all you're throwing away is sort of one index card's worth of stuff. And this is in keeping with, let's keep everything as simple as possible, make small changes, and as quickly as we can get feedback on what those changes are, it gives us a chance to do some course correction. So if that's what a user story is, we can now ask a bunch of questions like, how do you know if your user stories are any good? What makes a good user story? What's the process by which you and the customer can work together to develop them? How do you estimate how difficult they are to do? Because if we're going to use these as the unit of making progress in your project, probably not every story is going to be as complex to implement as all the other ones. And the customer certainly is going to want to have some input in which ones are most important. If your team has limited time, there are times when you'll have to push back and say, no, we can't do all of that within the next iteration, but we'll work with you so that we'll deliver the most important things first. You'll need to be able to track who's working on which stories and sort of where in the life cycle the story is, like when might it be done. And finally, a way to verify that when the code is delivered, it actually behaves the way the story says that it would. So all of these things is kind of what we're going to spend this week on.